music? Kevin has, Hope has? Long time ago? Okay. How does music change that kind of service? How does having music change the way you worship, the way you are here or present? Okay, so there's an element of joyfulness that you don't experience with just words.
Can I differentiate?
Go ahead.
Types of music?
Okay, so types of music, go ahead.
Like with the paperless, I actually can easily learn it and sing along, whereas the hymns I don't even try because I don't know how to read music or how
Okay.
the song goes.
So the kind of music that we sing depends. For some of the paperless music where we're learning it on the spot, people who don't read music, don't know the music can join in. The hymns are sometimes more challenging for people who don't read music. Okay? There's a lot of words and notes on those pages. And my hunch is most of us aren't actually reading that music. We're remembering what we heard, which is why when a musician comes along and plays what's actually on the page as opposed to what we know, we have a little bit of a disaster, right? None of us sing that last song the way it's written on the page, right? None of us hold a 4 counts. Who ends a phrase in the middle of a joyful song with 4 counts? That's ridiculous.
Oh, yeah, I started counting that.
Yep, I started counting too when I realized, but our instinct, right? Our instinct, because most of us are probably actually hearing the music because we heard it, okay? That's how music was actually originally conveyed. It was sung. No one wrote it down. The phenomena of writing down music, of writing down notes, of writing down chant, that thing that I do up at the phenomena of writing that down is actually much later in the history of all things musical, and especially in the church, okay? But it changes how we feel about the space. So how would you describe the music that we sang today? Is there a way that you think you could describe it? Other than good or bad. I'm not asking you to evaluate it, nor am I asking you to evaluate how well we did with it.
The first thing I think of is repetitive.
Okay? So there's some repetitiveness to the music itself, or that we are doing it repeatedly?
Well, the paperless music is intentionally repeated
Okay.
over and over again.
Okay?
Also, usually like the theme for the day is
Okay.
repetitive.
Okay? So music does a couple things, right? It repeats a theme. Okay? So lots of themes of light, of Jesus in the sky, sort of these themes around transfiguration. Because one of the things is, as people, it's not enough to just read the stories of God's people. We then tell our own stories about those stories, and the way that we do it is very often in song. That's what hymns are. They're just the beautiful stories and poetry that are the people of God's reflection on the stories of the people of God. And oftentimes, they elaborate, develop, they draw on more than just scripture. They sometimes draw on traditions that we come from, that images from those traditions. There are places where images of our everyday life kind of get pulled into the story of the people of God through song and poetry. Okay, so they repeat a theme. Sometimes they're just repetitive. Like we do them over and over again. What's the virtue or the benefit of repeating something? Okay, so you can remember it. It stays with us. You know where it comes in the service. Okay, so it provides both a rhythm and a pattern to the service. It stays with us. I'm just curious, how many of you walk out of church quoting something I said in a sermon, or how many of you walk out humming a tune? Tune. Nobody remembers what I say during a sermon. You might have a feeling, something that you connected to, but it's gone.
Maybe you should sing your sermon.
I could sing my sermons, though my singing today might make you not want to sing sermons. I did make it up as I went along. I just invented some new scales as well. So, happens on occasion. Okay? That's a hard song, yeah. That's just a hard song to sing. It's a beautiful song, but it is a hard song to sing. Okay. But there's something about music, it's an earworm. It stays with us. Which is a beautiful thing, because what it means is that the words of the people of God about the stories of God are they're singing in us all the time. I am one of those people that starts to hum something pretty much all the time. Sometimes Elizabeth has to tell me to stop. Sometimes my humming, she seems to forget that sometimes she tells me to stop. Okay, but we carry music with us, and it changes how we gather in this space. So I'd like to talk just a little bit about how I think about music, because the other thing about music is it is one of those make or break issues in a lot of churches. Okay, we used to joke in the Orthodox Church that if the devil came down anywhere, it was in the chanter's stand. Because there's just a lot of conflict that happens over music. And I think a part of that is we feel music. More than thinking music and reading music, we feel music. And we want to feel, when we come to church, we want to feel a particular way, and if the music doesn't help us do that, if it makes us feel different than we want to feel, we get upset. Music is one of those places where culture is all over it. The Book of Common Prayer is actually fairly austere in its words and its structure. But it is music and how we move our bodies, how we process when we sit and stand, what we wear, that changes from, Gail, I think last week asked the question about low church versus high church. It is the music, it is the shape of what we do that changes the sense of a church from being a kind of low church. And another way, Tony reminded me of this, that another way to think about the difference between low church and high church is actually that low church tends to be churches where they want to minimize the distinction between the clergy and the people. Okay, so churches, and this is very much of an American strength in our churches, is that recognition that the priest, the pastor, is not king or queen on high, but rather one of the people. And so low churches tend to try to symbolize that and illustrate that in a lot of ways. Priests tend to not wear vestments. The music tends to be, at least what that congregation thinks is very singable. Sometimes only that congregation can sing that music because you grew up singing it, right? You know what the words, it's your culture. And so you can sing your culture. But you can't sing somebody else's culture. It's hard to sing somebody else's culture. High church, one of the ways that we illustrate high church is with music, and the part of what is symbolized in high church is that there's a distinction, a greater distinction between the people and the laity, and sometimes it's the clergy, and sometimes it's the sacrament. Okay, so there's a distinction between the role that I play and the role that everybody else plays. And so sometimes that's demonstrated by very, very high, beautiful, sumptuous liturgy, where the priest doesn't sit among you. The priest sits up above. So music helps shape that. Music tells you immediately about culture and what's okay in a church. Is it okay to clap? Is it okay to sway a little bit? It tells you about the seasons. Okay, so today's music, a little bit more on the upbeat side, at least that was the hope, right? We're talking about, it's a feast day with transfiguration. When you come to church next Sunday, it will be completely different music. Okay, it will not all be from the hymnal, but it will be from enriching our music, as well as the hymnal. You know the pieces. And I am emphasizing pieces that we know, that I know that people can sing easily, pieces that are a little bit more somber in tone. We're going to enter into more minor keys, in part because As Westerners, we think of minor as a more kind of grieving, solemn tone. Major is not. Now, that is a cultural difference, okay? As an example, the music that we are going to sing for the next week during the Eucharistic prayers, it's from Enriching Our Music, and it comes actually out of the Russian Orthodox tradition, and the Episcopal Church has borrowed it. And it's done in the Lenten season all the time in Episcopal churches. And we've sung it. Can we sing? Holy, holy, da 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 da, la da 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 da, la da 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 da, la da 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 da. Okay, that is done through all sorts of Episcopal churches at Lent. And I have to tell you, when I first heard it, I was like, that's weird. Why are they doing this during Lent? Because in the Russian tradition, that music is not Lenten music. That music is actually festal. It's a festal tone. It's meant to be a lighter and cheerier tone. But for Westerners, the moment you get a little bit of a minor in there, it's Lenten. Now, in the East, the Lenten music is even less familiar and tonal. It's a Middle Eastern scale. But that's a cultural thing, right? It really shifts based on what your culture thinks of as normal, okay? Every culture defines that, and that's why we have such conflict over music. So at this church is unique among Episcopal churches in this area. It is the only church that I know of that has Levis in the pews. I have been to other Episcopal churches where Levis is on a shelf, but none where it's in the pews. And that represents a cultural shift in this church, right? It represents an attempt to bring in the music of the Black tradition, which I know did not happen uncontroversially at this church, okay? So this church started out as a very high church, Anglo-Catholic, straight out of the hymnal, straight out of the BCP, okay? None of this music where you clap, or you move your feet, or you have syncopated rhythm, none of that. Okay, that was introduced. Mother Alcina told me she introduced that when the hymnal came out, and there was some conflict over that because it changes the feel of it. Okay? So what we try to do now is we try to pick and choose a little bit. We want to pick hymns that evoke the memories and that kind of feeling that comes with something that you have sung for ages. And we want to also pick music from the African American tradition. And so we use Levis as a way to do that together. So we're already got multiple cultures and multiple ways of doing music kind of going on. Now, when I pick music, and I should tell you that Margaret actually picks most of the hymns, and the paperless music team decides what paperless music to use. Margaret picks the hymns, and we've got a couple cheat books that are great. Sitting on my shelf are a book that gives you suggested hymns for all of the church year, all of the lectionary readings. So years A, B, and C. I've got a book. They put out one every year. I don't get a new one every year because it's basically the same set of hymns every year. I try to compare back and forth. But there's sort of a cheat sheet that says, here are hymns that follow the themes of the service. So Margaret has those at home, and she goes through and she suggests hymns. We always try to open. How do we open generally with a hymn? What kind of hymn? How would you describe the feeling of the hymn that we open with? Okay, it's joyful. It gives us movement, okay? And it's meant to draw us together. Early churches, when they gathered, everybody processed in. It wasn't just the clergy. You would gather out here, which is actually kind of what we do on Palm Sunday, right? We gather here, and then we process in together coming into the church. Sometimes you even do readings outside before you enter the church, and that hymn is a procession hymn. It's to get us gathered together. Okay, so then the next hymn, so oftentimes psalms, it's worth noting, a psalm is just a hymn. It's just an ancient Hebrew hymn, and sometimes we sing those. Sometimes we do it in a singing back and forth style. Sometimes we speak those. Okay, so then where's the next hymn in the service? Next time we sing. Gospel. And what is the most often repeated word when the gospel comes out? What do we sing? Alleluia. I have told the paperless music folks that pretty much every gospel hymn that you choose to do should have Alleluia in it. Because that is a time when we are focusing our energy and our minds and our hearts on this particular set of stories. And we are grateful that we have these stories. So we sing joy and Alleluia in those. We will not do that during Lent. Okay? Next hymn. The offertory. Offertory, you know what it is? It's just music to cover the setting of the table and the bringing of the, right? We don't, it also is music that helps us settle into prayer. Usually, we kind of take the tone down a little bit on the offertory, right? We try not to pick something where there's a lot of clapping and movement, because in part, it's giving you the space to prepare yourselves just as much as I need the time and the space to prepare what's happening on the table. Okay? So often we do a hymn at the offertory because we need the time of that. And we try to create a space where you are able to enter into communion more fully. Next hymn. What's that? Sanctus. I was told that if you sing nothing else in the entire liturgy, you sing the Sanctus. Because what do we say right before it starts? What do I say? You guys remember? Some version of joining with the angels and archangels, we sing. Okay? And the words from that come straight out of Isaiah/Revelation. Okay? They are a quote from Scripture. It is the song of the angels. And so we sing that song with the angels. And it is a song of awesome celebration. Holy, holy, holy. All of creation is filled with your glory, and so are we. And in case you have noticed that, so at the beginning of it, during the holy, 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 I bow. Because when Isaiah was confronted with the throne of God and the coal on his lips, he fell on his face. Holy, holy, holy before the angels. But then I stand at the point where we say that God is in all of creation. I stand and I begin to put my arms out as a kind of symbolic reminder. All of creation is a part of it. And then God is in us. Have you noticed that people cross themselves? God is in the universe and the angels. God is in all of creation. God is in us. And so this is a physical acknowledgement that what's happening at the table is happening in us as well. We are becoming the body of Christ. Okay? And we join with all of creation in this song of joy and delight at this moment. So if nothing else gets sung, that should get sung. Okay, the next hymn. Lamb of God, is that what it is? That one, totally covering music for breaking the bread and sharing it. And we do it as a kind of repetitive song that everybody can join. And partly why we do something that's a little bit more repetitive there is because my hope is that at this point in the service, y'all can put your books down. That's actually why we don't print the Eucharistic words in there. I think we spend so much time reading things and looking at words, and our brains, it changes how we process things when we read it versus how we hear it. Now, I'm a reading person. I read all sorts of things. But sometimes I think it's good for us to put it down, to not have to worry about what our eyes are seeing, to hear what's around us, to sing or not sing as you need to in that moment. But if you're going to sing, I don't want you to have to shuffle through a hymnal. Which is why the first communion hymn is always a piece of paperless music that's taught in the moment. Okay, so anyone who's new can learn it. They don't need to be able to read music. They don't need to come from this culture or tradition. It's a way of making sure that in this moment everybody is welcome. It's repetitive. so that you can sing it, you can harmonize to it, or you can listen to it without having to worry about where you're at in the music, if you got the words right or not. It's also repetitive and hopefully a little bit meditative. So if you just want to sit and listen, for many people, once they receive the Eucharist, they want to sit in quiet prayer. And so it's giving you the space to do that without, again, having to find your place in a hymnal and figure out what line you're on. Okay? And then we do a second hymn. Usually that one is a more full hymn, and to be honest, the reason we wait as long as we do is I happen to like singing hymns. And so I've asked people to wait until I'm actually at a place where I can join in, right? So generally the first verse will start as I'm just finishing off clearing the table, and then I can join in to that hymn with you. And that is often a hymn that is themed around what we've just done as celebrating the Eucharist, and then also tied into the theme of the day. Last hymn. Okay? It's the recessional. It's covering music, once again, because there was a time when we processed out. But it's also an opportunity to remind us that the liturgy, the thing that we do here, goes with us out into the world. Okay? And sometimes it goes with us out into the world as that kind of earworm that we're going to keep humming. I almost always, if I remember, I almost always try to sing a very singable and familiar hymn at the end of the service. Didn't go quite as well today. And a part of that is one of the things that I've noticed is Margaret has a memory of what this church has sung for 70 years. That doesn't mean that it's been sung in the last 30 years, okay? So this is one of the things, right? The things that we remember from our youth and that we feel strongly and deeply may not be actually what we know or the people around us know now. And so it's a challenge. And I have to say, picking music in this church is definitely a challenge because I always want to pick from the hymnal and from Levis. I want to make sure there's some paperless music so that people can participate, especially people that don't sing hymns as well. I also want people who are a little bit addicted to books to be able to put them down, okay, and enter into this time and this space together. One of the things this church doesn't have is a choir. When I got here, the choir was small, and within about 2 years, it had gotten smaller, and what I heard from people was that folks were a little bit tired. What I noticed is I was still seated up on the raised area, the altar area. What I noticed is that I could barely hear the choir, even though I was sitting next to the choir. And then choir took summer break. And what I noticed is when the choir was in the congregation, all of a sudden everybody sounded better because people could hear the choir. Okay, and at that point, I think we had 4 people. And so I asked the choir to consider continuing to stay in the congregation, and if they wanted to continue to practice hymns, they could do that, and they decided that they didn't want to do that. I think for some folks it was time. And it was a lot of time commitment that they wanted to be able to put down. I know that people miss the choir. I'll be honest with you, I miss choirs. I love choral music. It's my favorite form of any kind of classical music, and really any kind of music at all. I always prefer sung music and choral music. But it's one thing that we miss here, we don't have. One of the strengths of not having it is it has actually made us sing more together as a congregation. Sometimes choirs have the disadvantage of pulling all the performance energy to the choir, right? The choir is going to perform for us. My goal, this is a conversation that happens among clergy frequently. Is the liturgy a performance? I want to tell you, I am not performing for you up here. I understand that good liturgy takes practice, It takes knowing where to move, it takes knowing where to pause, it takes knowing what to wear, what not to do. I think about how I want to set the table in a way that gives honor to the setting of the table, that doesn't dump the wine on the floor. I should tell you that the moment I was ordained, the first thing I did as a deacon is I dumped a cup off of the huge altar table at St. Michael's. There should have been plenty of room. I knocked it right off. Okay? It takes some practice to learn how to do that. But I don't think of it as a performance, because I'm not performing for you, and you are not observing, or you are not an audience. I find that idea of church utterly repugnant, to be honest. I have very strong feelings about it. Church is not a place for you to sit as an audience and the clergy and the choir to perform for you. Church is a place where we participate. And so music, reading together, saying the psalm together, moving together, is one of the ways in which I try to undermine a little bit of that performance mentality that I think we have sometimes, and ensure that everybody gets to participate. Okay, I'm going to pause. Thoughts, comments, reflections on how the music works or doesn't work for you.
I just want to make a comment to support what you're saying about it not being a performance, because that also just really bugs me. And when I think about it, and you talk about liturgy, you have to practice, and there's a variety of kinds of liturgy and quality, but that's true for hospitality, that's true for planning the music, that's true for doing the lunches, that's true for reading, and that doesn't make it a performance, because we're practicing. So, and I have really hated to see the kind of elitism that I've seen with choirs, as much as I also love choral music. But as a performance, I don't like it at all. So thank you.
Yeah. And one of the things I want to say about practice, there is a fancy word that we use in the study of ethics. It's called habituation. We create habits. It's not just that I have to practice what I'm doing at the table, but I'm remembering that I am setting the table for the people of God to feast. I'm not just throwing down a plate and a cup like I do with my breakfast in the morning. Sometimes that cup never makes it to a table, that plate, I just eat my egg at the kitchen sink. I always sit down for my cup of tea. But I would never do that here in church. Because we are practicing not just how to do this well, but we are forming the kinds of habits that we want to take with us, so that when anytime we sit down with beloved friends and family, we are welcoming them to a table where God just might show up. Because that's what God tends to do. He just kind of shows up. She shows up wherever we are. Okay? And so we practice that. We create habits by how we do this liturgy together.
This is going to be a slightly nerdy comment about music. But very recently, they have done studies where if you participate in music, whether it's singing, playing an instrument, whatever, we now have these little electrode things that can read the energy in your brain. And when you make music, your brain absolutely lights up. It's like it's at a festival compared to any other activity that you do. I think that's pretty interesting.
And we know that people who have Alzheimer's, they remember the song, right? They remember the music.
Having a hard time, I turn on Pandora, and sometimes I play 60s music, sometimes I play instrumental smooth jazz, and her brain waves change.
Yep. There's something.
Can I also say
Yeah.
one thing? I don't know. One thing that I notice about, you want me?
Yes, because the people on YouTube need you to have it.
Oh, okay, I got it, okay. So one thing when I notice about music, like many other habitual things in life, is that we don't like change. And so when I see people's attitudes about the music changing, it just makes me understand that okay, I have to have more understanding and patience because they're having a hard time with change. But I have to get used to that. The older I get, it's like, it's hard to change no matter what it is, because our brain feels pleasure and pain. And the pain of not having what you used to have is just too hard for some people.
Yep. And so, I mean, believe it or not, I actually try not to change everything in the liturgy, okay? But also, I want to invite you, when there is change, to ask the question, what new thing am I learning about God right now? What new thing am I learning about myself? Because the problem that we all have is when we get stuck in a rut, we think that God just works with us this way, and if we get out of that rut, God must not be there. And that is never true. God is always there, wherever there is. And so ask that question. Wow, this makes me uncomfortable. Is there something I could learn from this? It may be that what you learn from it is, wow, this does not work for me. I have spent time among evangelical Christians. When I was in college, I joined an evangelical campus fellowship because there wasn't anything else for me on my campus. I didn't know what evangelicals were like. I had no idea that they prayed in all these crazy, weird ways, and they just prayed spontaneously, and they sang these songs with guitars. And I'm like, what? Who has a guitar in church? It was horrifying to me. And then it kind of grew on me. I kind of like some of those songs, and I have a guitar because I was in an evangelical fellowship and I wanted to learn to play the guitar because I liked it. It grew on me, and I learned something about it. Now, I'm not a big fan of evangelical services at this point. On occasion, I miss one. It just doesn't work for me, okay? That doesn't mean that it doesn't work for other people, that it doesn't profoundly connect with other people. I took a friend of mine once. She had only grown up in evangelical contexts and circles. I took her to an Orthodox Easter service. And usually when I take people to an Orthodox Easter service, they're like, oh, it's so beautiful. And there's smells, and there's bells, and there's 50 different things happening. There's a priest over there, and a bunch of altar boys over there, and a bunch of old ladies kissing icons and lighting candles and moving around, and babies on the floor, and there aren't usually pews, at least in the church I grew up in, there weren't pews, and so people were sitting on the floor and walking around, and candles are, there's just chaos. Now, I thought that was normal. Okay, and it's beautiful. It actually is an orchestrated chaos. But if you're not part of that, it just looks weird to you. And then the priest gets up and he goes behind this big painted icon screen, and you don't see him half the time. And he's muttering prayers over an altar that nobody can hear. And my friend was horrified. She was like, she actually might have used something along the lines of, I think this is an abomination. Like, she had such a gut response. Because for her, all of this was just craziness. And it was the first time I was like, oh, there are just people for whom this doesn't work. She is a lovely woman. She is a lovely follower of Jesus. What I grew up in, my culture, my tradition, just never going to work for her. Just isn't. And that's okay, because God works in all sorts of different ways. Okay? But sometimes it's good for us to remember that God works a little bit differently than just how God works among us. And so when there's a change, I just invite you to ask where God is in this. And you might decide that God is just not there for you. I'm going to do Gail and then.
I just have a question about that. And I'll just say that when you first came, I was caring for my mom. So I came once a month.
Yep.
And it's good now to hear why the change happened. But fast backwards, it was really offensive to me because it felt like somebody came in and needed to teach me how to sing. And so when I come and I have somebody, and I've been singing all my life, I've been in choirs, and I have somebody talk to me like I've never sung before, it was quite offensive to me. And I think it's hung on until I heard you today. So what I would say is when there's going to be that kind of a change, maybe work us into it, because from talking to members and past members, they don't know that, and it affected them, and this is an African American church, that we didn't know how to sing, and we needed to be taught, and we needed to be teach every Sunday, and it's quite offensive. And it, like I say, until today, because God's working with me, it has been offensive to me. Now, I have to say, last Sunday, what I noticed was people are remembering the songs. So when the leaders get up, and I'm old, don't remember your names, but when you get up, I noticed last week we jumped ahead of you and we just started singing, which was nice. So I don't mind being taught something, but today you said that you do it every time for new members. Well, that was new to me. But I think I'll say me, Gail, it's good when there's that kind of change to know before, so that you don't harbor whatever ill, feelings you got to work through for a couple years before you hear the change. And the only other thing I would say, I didn't like having to come to these classes, but I came because I wanted to be a lay reader. No, I didn't. She said real clearly, you come or you're not. So I said, okay, but I keep coming because I am learning so much. The first one, if you weren't here, you need to go back, because Mother explained what she can change and what she can't. And if that had been done long before, I think everybody would feel different. So that's why I say give us a chance to change, because when I heard that, I said, oh, she changed that music because she can. Well, I get it. She kept this because she can't. I get that. But since none of us knew that, I'll take responsibility for not knowing. But it hits you different. And so I think, I've worked through it because it didn't keep me away. A lot of times I didn't singing. But when I heard that, every time I'm hearing why things move differently. And it gives context, and it makes you understand why something happened. So I appreciate, I can gripe a lot, but, I see both sides, and I am understanding a lot of change, which also makes me think, am I with the change? Which I think everybody, if they're not admitting it, they are thinking it. But anyway, no, I thank you.
Yeah.
I thank you. 'Cause
You're welcome.
I'm learning.
You're welcome. You're welcome. And I will say that at the beginning, I probably could have done some more explanation. I think also one of the things that really struck me at St. Philip is I asked multiple people how things were done here, and I got a different answer from every single person. And I have to tell you, coming up with a liturgy that reflected that was really hard. And partly what it told me also was that every single one of you that have been in this church for a long time, you remember a different era as the ideal. Like, every one of you remembers somebody's got the 40s, and someone's got the 50s, and someone's got the 70s, and someone's got this really short period in the 60s where things were crazy with a guitar, and somebody, and so a part of that is me coming in, was trying to put together a liturgy from a group of people who have had such a wide experience and love a particular thing. And if that thing isn't there, it does feel insulting.
And if you don't know why.
Yes.
But
Yep.
again, what you say is, I was coming once a month.
Yep.
Because I was taking care of my mom. So I didn't say a lot because I wasn't here. And I'm not one to do any of this if I'm not there. I can hear, but I can't say anything because I'm not present. So when I would come once a month, it's like, oh.
That's different. Huh. Yep.
Okay, I'm
Yep.
not gonna sing it.
Yeah. I will not. You cannot make me sing that.
Here I am singing it.
Yep. Yeah.
So don't feel bad about
No.
what I said, but
No.
it's just a way that we learn, and
Yep.
I think the more we can be open about what's changing, then we're more supportive, and you don't have any, well, what they do that.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's fair. I think that's important. So, and a part of it is I want to encourage you, come to spiritual formation classes and Bible studies, even if you think you know it all already. Because none of us do. And that's the opportunity, because I'm not going to stop in the middle of liturgy and explain a whole lot. for me, that is a break. Unless it fits into what I'm preaching or an announcement, I'm not going to stop and teach in the middle of a liturgy. But we need to have these kind of conversations in classes. So, Elizabeth, I saw your hand.
Is this the place for us to jump in and talk about why paperless?
Yeah.
So Maria asked the music team to talk about why paperless, and I've talked about a lot of the reasons why I love paperless music before, but one that I want to talk about today is the theology of music is really, I mean, that's why we sing, is to, in church, is to get across a certain theology. And sometimes, once in a while, hymns or songs make me cringe with their theology. And we saw that today, that with the paperless music, I heard it from a couple of people that they didn't like the idea of come to the table of grace, this is God's table, it's not yours or mine. Now, for me, I liked that line because I've come from a tradition where priests could deny people communion and say, nope, you're not welcome. But I heard that's, for other people, that's really offensive and not where we're at. And so we decided as a music team to change that line, and that's what's really great about paperless. We can just change it, whereas in the hymns, that's all just printed there, although I do try. I sometimes change pronouns when there's too many he's for God. So yeah, that's one reason I really love paperless. Do you guys want to add anything to that?
I would.
You had something that you were ready to say, right?
Well, I didn't really prepare anything, but one of the reasons I like, first of all, I come from a tradition where I've used hymnals. We've sung with hymnals every Sunday morning. I am part of that tradition. But I am also, over the years, it is getting harder for me to hold a hymnal in my hand, especially when I have to hold a cane in one hand and a hymnal in the other. So that's part of the reason why I appreciate paperless music, even though I don't always remember it like today. Because I almost started singing "This is God's Table." Anyway, so that's part of why I like it. And I think the words are easy to, once you start singing them, they're easy to remember, even for someone like me who doesn't have that great of a memory. And I wanted to say something else. But I think that what we sing relates to what we're doing, or what we are, the readings and the gospel and everything, what we are singing relates to all of that. So I know that, a lot of people are they love singing from the hymnal, but I also think that paperless is also a valuable. Okay, I'm done.
Okay. Amy and then Sue. Oh, Aaron, did you want to say anything?
But I can wait.
Okay.
Not used to microphone. Just from a newcomer's perspective, I personally appreciate the paperless. I can't read music. I'm not as familiar with hymns, and so it's really, for me, I like being taught the music. I like so. And if I had no church background, I know that as absolute newcomer, never ever stepped foot in a church, sitting and looking at a hymnal, I can't even imagine how I could enter into a worshipful space, whereas I can follow Aaron, or I can, whatever. And so I really appreciate that, just from a new person perspective. So.
Thanks for sharing. Sue would like to talk about it.
I think I told Elizabeth this a few weeks back. I love choral music. I have always loved choral music, and I love good music. But But I really like what this church has done with the paperless music, because no matter how beautiful music is, if you're all doing it together, and paperless music needs to be simple, simpler, anyhow. The feeling that I get when I'm participating in this whole group of making music, no matter simple or not simple, is a feeling that I don't get anywhere else. I love it. And it's to me, who just loves choral music and complicated choral music, I'm willing to sacrifice all of that for the feeling I get of community when we're all doing this together. That is just magnificent.
Thank you. That is wonderful.
Yeah, I just wonder, is paperless music, I like microphones. No, my question about paperless music, is it pulled out of a paperless music book, or is it something that you write?
Does it exist as paper before?
Right, and I ask that because going to, I visit all kind of churches, and non-denominational churches, now, God forgive me, but I think they write them themselves instead of, a book, a hymnal, or from a piece of copyrighted music, you could say. So I've always wondered, is it that our leaders write music, and which is fine, or is it out of a published paperless music book?
The answer is yes and no. So there is a book. There is a book that that Makes Community has published that has some of these hymns in it. There are a lot of hymns that are not in that book, but that are, taught in those workshops, and a lot of them are available on YouTube, and so that's where we're learning them is through YouTube or through these workshops, either in person or on Zoom. And then there are a couple that have been written by the music leaders at this church specifically.
Okay, I would encourage, I know there was a gentleman, I don't know his name, very tall, a lot of curly hair. He's interested in writing music. And so, if I hear people say something, I've been taught to ask. So that's why I'm asking. So I'll let him know, because he's really interested. And other people might be. I'm not, so don't worry. I'm not. But it's just good to know that those opportunities are there.
Yep. And we will be singing, Aaron has written the music, hasn't been the team. Aaron's being modest. Aaron has written some music. And we will be singing something that Aaron wrote for Ash Wednesday. We'll be singing it as the communion hymn at Ash Wednesday. And it's beautiful.
Can I add one more thing
Yep.
about also the paperless music takes songs from other traditions and from other countries, for example, like
The Gloria
the Gloria,
is from the Gloria liturgy.
like the what was it that we sang? Yeah, from South Africa, like, songs from India, or, from various different places, oral music that they sing. And so that's another source of paperless.
And the music that makes community organization is great at gathering all these different songs and then making them available for us to learn.
Right.
Yeah, and one of the things that's lovely about paperless music is because it's taught, it reflects back to how music was originally taught, which is orally and in groups. It also allows for a much wider representation because we don't have to wait for it to be printed necessarily. It also is one of the things that's difficult about the hymnal. So for instance, we did a redo of our Book of Common Prayer in 1979, and there were some significant theological shifts in that hymnal. Those in that Book of Common Prayer. Some of those shifts are not actually reflected in our hymns. So in our hymns, we get the theology of the church over the last 1,500 years. And sometimes there's a line in those hymns that we're like, ugh. At Trinity, they love to do this one hymn where it says in the third verse, and I will take my rod and my staff, and I was like, I cannot talk about basically hitting a child in a hymn. Now, there was a time when that was, that was seen as just normal. That's how you raise your children. So a part of it is the hymnal keeps us in a particular, sometimes theology or culture that we may not actually want to sing about. And what concerns me, honestly, as a priest is, y'all are going to remember the hymns more than you're going to remember what I say. So we're singing some hymns where oftentimes it's usually the third or the fourth line. I'm like, that's not what I want us to focus on. And so partly this paperless music gives us the opportunity to both pull from multiple cultures, pull from refrains that are familiar to us, pull from psalms and just set the psalm to music, or say things that we want to say more clearly that reflect kind of who we are as a community. So, Aaron, did you have a comment or no? If you don't, that's fine.
But everything that I was going to say was already said by people. I would kind of echo what Amy was saying. I've been singing pretty much since I was born, but I don't read music either. I'm starting to learn like these last couple of months, but so being able to sing these hymns without having to sit next to somebody who knows it really well or something like that is really helpful to me. Yeah. And also what Sue said about that feeling of community. I feel like when we're reading hymns out of the book, when we're singing hymns out of the book, it kind of puts us in our own little world in a way. But when we're sharing this music together, I feel it draws us in closer to each other.
And I just want to add, too, is that Aaron and Elizabeth didn't go off on their own to do this. They've gone to workshops that have helped them to create this paperless music. So they've got a lot of experience going to that. So I appreciate you taking your time to go to the workshops.
And Deacon and Sue and Margaret and Sue.
And yeah, they ended up, I don't know if you know, but in the last workshop they went to, they actually ended up leading. So they are becoming leaders in the paperless. But what I also want to tell you, almost all the hymns in this hymnal started off paperless, right? They were sung among a people who did not have, who couldn't read, who weren't allowed to read. Reading was punishable by death, but they all sang. They sang in fields, they sang in churches, they sang in homes. And so there's actually, Leave Us is a little bit of a difficult book because it took music that was entirely oral in its passing and it put it to very complicated organ music set for big choirs, right? Most of you don't have a more than an octave range, and yet there's music in here that demands that you sing that. And so a part of the paperless is actually, it was partly my attempt to be like, we can't sing this music very well. We have a really hard time with the way it's written in here, but we should be singing music from the African American tradition, and all of that was paperless. So the first workshop that we actually went to Ohio, because that was the first time that the paperless music community was doing paperless music specifically from the African American tradition. And I was like, okay, that works. Because to be honest with you, a lot of paperless music, super white in a lot of ways. And it just is. And so a part of it was, let's take a team to go to a workshop specifically focusing on paperless music out of a tradition that was already paperless. And so we're trying to do that, but it's hard. I don't think we always do it well, or as well as I wish sometimes, but we are definitely trying to incorporate a kind of a tradition that this hymnal reflects that is a little bit easier to sing than this hymnal. So that's a part of what's going on in there. Other comments or questions? Yeah.
I hate singing in groups. Pat was laughing at me earlier because she was trying to pass me a hymnal, and I was like, I don't sing out of the hymnal. I hate singing in groups, but I like singing the paperless music, and I catch myself singing in the shower. And as someone who didn't grow up with a lot of hymnals or even music in the church, I find that so much easier to follow, and it's where I feel spirit. So just a little testament to that. But yeah, I hate singing in groups. So you guys are finding something I like.
I don't know. I'm going to stop. I don't know if you all caught, I wrote an article after the paperless community team led us in a fully paperless worship. I wrote an article for the Diocesan Digest, and at the beginning of that, I told a story about somebody in the parish who had told me they hated music and then came up to me and said, this was the best music service. Like I sang, that was Bree. I didn't name her. Okay, friends, I'm gonna actually pull, I'm sorry, I'm gonna pull us to end because I do want us to be able to go free. Keep talking about it. And you know, one of the things I'm hearing, you bring this up multiple times, Gail, is knowing the why is really important. And I hear that, and if you want to know why something is happening, I need you to ask me. Because that will help me form the kind of spiritual formation that we can do. And I love teaching. It is by far my favorite thing to do, which is why it goes on far too long. But I love it. And if we want to do this on a regular basis after church, before church, I am totally up for it. I love the why. So ask me, and we can start doing classes that are kind of along your lines of interest. So thank you. Keep talking. I appreciate your time.
Thank you. Can we close with prayer?
Can we close with a sung prayer?